Hello, Will. It's very nice to have you on my podcast today.
G'day, Vladimir. Thank you very much for having me. It is a privilege.
And as a commentator yourself, you've been speaking a lot about the current government. You've been speaking a lot about the alternatives that the country have had in the 2024 election. How do you assess? Let's start from a more general point of view, general question. How do you assess the state that your country found itself in 2025?
Are you referring to my country of origin being Australia or my country of residence being the United Kingdom,
The UK.
UK? What's interesting that I asked that question because so many of the problems that the United Kingdom faces now are consistent in Australia. They're
Hmm.
consistent across the Anglosphere. You have the problems associated with mass migration. You have this self-flagellating instinct which says that my country is somehow evil. In the UK, it's the evils of colonialism, for example. But in Australia, it would be the evils of our past with the indigenous peoples. You have stagnant economies, give or take, in both countries. You have this feeling of decline in both countries. So the reason I want to ask that is because whilst there are nuances, and I think the UK is in a worse place than Australia, you
Hmm.
are seeing consistent challenges across the Western world and particularly across the Anglosphere. When I look at the UK specifically at the moment, I love this country. I made a conscious decision to move to the United Kingdom from Australia via the
When
United
did you move?
States. So I lived in the United Kingdom for 3 years. I then moved to the United States for 3 years, and
Hmm.
I've been back for about a year. So in aggregate, I've been in this country for about 4 years, and I love it. And my plan is to stay, but I am very worried about the future of the United Kingdom. And in my podcast and in the media work that I do try and challenge people, and I try and say this country has been through dark times before. You know, if you're a student of history, you'd know that the 80s were parlous with the miners' strikes and a lot of civil unrest. The 70s, the IMF had to bail out the UK economy because it was in such a poor state. Obviously, you had a world war in the 1940s and the 1910s. We can go back to pre 1066, and there were Vikings that were raping and pillaging up and down the country. So it's been bad times. But I think the issue is that there are some problems that the country faces now which are not necessarily easy to be reversed. You can change economic settings pretty easily. Well, no. You can change economic settings, if not easily. You can change tax policy. You can change
Hmm.
productivity policies. But the demographic change that you are currently seeing in the United Kingdom, that can't simply just be reversed with the next government unless you have wide scale deportations on a on a scale that we've never seen before. So that's a long and roundabout way of saying that I think the United Kingdom is in a dark period, but it's a country that I've got an enduring respect for, and that's why I'm still here.
Very interesting. You mentioned migration. You draw some parallels with Australia and the US. Uh, do you have those same problems in Australia? Excuse me, I know nothing about Australia. I've never been to Australia. It's a long flight, and I have no idea how people, travel back and forth. But tell me something about your country. What are the main problems facing there?
So, some people in the United Kingdom would be surprised to hear that there is actually higher numbers of migration, uh, net
How is that
migration.
possible? But
It is. It's.
it's
I
such
think
a long
Australia.
travel.
Yeah, but it's a long way to travel for someone in the United Kingdom. It's not a long way to travel for someone in Southeast Asia, for example.
Hmm.
So this is the difference between the immigration debate in Australia compared to the United Kingdom. In Australia, you get high numbers of migration from Asia and then Southeast Asia. You get less migration from Africa and the Middle East. There's still numbers coming from those areas, but it is less. Now, I think for me, as an immigrant in the United Kingdom, I'm not against immigration, but I'm against immigration when you have people that are coming from cultures that are not culturally compatible, and you have immigrants that are not going to be net contributors to the economy. So, if, for example, you are an Australian in the United Kingdom in the top tax bracket, like I am, I would say that I am a good immigrant for this country. I believe in the
Mm.
values, I've integrated, all that stuff. The problem is that that I'm in the minority of immigrants in this country. Now, the elephant in the room, and you asked me for the differences between Australia and the United Kingdom. Whilst there are more immigrants coming to Australia at the moment, and don't get me wrong, that's a very big problem because many of them are still not net contributors. They're coming from cultures which are not as culturally incompatible as the countries that are flooding into the United Kingdom. So if you're coming from China or you're coming from India and you're going to Australia, there aren't as big a cultural gap as if you're coming from a third world African country or
Mm.
areas in the Middle East which have very, very barbaric and backwards views towards women and which have very, very different views around integration. So the problem in the UK at the moment isn't just the number of people that are coming, it is the mix of people that are coming to this country. And I've been comforted to hear from Nigel Farage last week that what he's basically said is we will put a pause on all immigration. But then when we do restart it, if there is a reform government elected, you will have only the best and brightest from culturally compatible countries. So you want basically high earners working in professional fields from countries in the Anglosphere. That is how I would think about immigration to this country. But at the moment, that is a very, very small portion of the people who are coming.
After I looked up the numbers, I've got to know that over 14,000 people have migrated illegally to the UK this year, and this is a large increase from the previous year. And this, of course, happened under Keir Starmer government.
Mm.
Do you think he has plans on handling it? And if yes, then which actions is he taking, and why is it failing so much?
Yeah, so we need to just make sure that we separate legal migration from illegal migration.
Yeah.
So what I was just talking about was legal migration, but on the subject of illegal migration, you're right, it has gone out of control, and I think that statistic that you've just pulled up is overly generous. My understanding is in the first year of the Starmer government, I think it just ticked over a year a few weeks ago or a month ago, we are now approaching 50,000 illegal migrants. That doesn't even include the 100,000, if not
Hmm.
more, Afghan migrants that are going to come as a result of this extraordinary scandal that we've only heard about in the last couple of weeks. But to answer your question, uh, there is a unique problem with illegal migration. And it's a problem, A, because you don't know the people who are coming into the country. But B, it sends a message that you are not in control of your own borders. And the number one responsibility of a state is to basically clearly define and then protect your own borders and then protect your own people. If you can't do that, you're not a functioning state. That is literally rule number one of statehood. And I think there is a change in the public mood in the United Kingdom in the last 6 to 12 months, maybe even less, 3 to 6 months, where people are now going, you know what? I don't care if I'm called far right for calling this out. I don't care if I'm
Hmm.
called racist. I don't care if I'm called a fascist. This is not acceptable. Now, the Australia and UK comparison is interesting because Australia had a similar problem with illegal boats in the early 2010s, and they managed to solve the problem. Now, to your question, I don't think Keir Starmer can solve the problem because he is unwilling to do the things that would be required to solve illegal migration in this country. And as a result, I think you're going to keep seeing the numbers rising, if not plateauing or rising.
Hmm. When you refer to things that are required to solve these problems, are one of
Yeah.
those things leaving ECHR?
Yep, that is number one. Unfortunately, at the moment, this country is shackled by international human rights law. And Keir Starmer, who doesn't really seem to believe in much other than international human rights law, is
Hmm.
unwilling to do that. So I don't think you're going to be able to solve the problem until you get out of that. You also have the Human Rights Act, which similarly provides a handbrake on being able to deport people who have managed to get into the country. So there's that legal layer at the top. But the second thing is you need to send a very clear message to people smugglers and to the people who are trying to arrive by boat that if you come to this country illegally by boat, you will never, ever be allowed in the United Kingdom to stay permanently. This is what Australia did. And they said, what we're going to do is we're going to have an offshore detention program. So this is comparable to the Rwanda scheme, which was, I think, dropped far too early in the United Kingdom. In Australia, we had Nauru, which is a small, tiny little island off the coast of Australia. And if people tried to get over by boat into Australia, they were intercepted, they were taken to Nauru, they were put into detention centres, and then their claims for asylum were heard there. But we said very clearly, if you actually try and come by boat, you will never actually get into the mainland of Australia. You will then be taken back and resettled somewhere else, if not back in your home country. And because you are still offering hotels or private housing to these asylum seekers, because you're giving them money, because you're saying, well, you're almost saying that you can just take a delivery job and basically have a pretty cushy life in the UK compared to where you've come from, there is still that incentive to come. So effective illegal immigration policy starts with an effective deterrent. Australia proved that, but unfortunately the UK isn't willing to provide that effective deterrent because I think they're scared of the optics of that and annoying their far left base.
Hypothetically, if Keir Starmer, in your opinion, is not doing so well, and in the opinion of many other people around the country now, as he's one of the least supported prime minister ever to have existed, I believe. Um, do you think in the 2024 election, general election, there were any genuine alternatives that people should have looked at?
uh, well, here's the problem with politics. Well, no, it's not the problem. It's just the reality of politics is it does go in cycles. And you'd had a conservative government that was a very poor government. That was a very poor government that was getting worse and was obviously very tired. And it would have been 14 years. Like one party in a democracy doesn't just stay in power forever.
Hmm.
Inevitably, you have change. And so the unfortunate problem was it was just that time for change in the United Kingdom. But the issue was the change that was offered was a Labor government that wasn't ready to govern. Now, I'm staggered by this. They had 14 years to do the really detailed policy thinking to provide an alternative vision for the country. And yet it's now become very obvious that they don't have an agenda. They don't
Hmm.
have a real plan for change. They keep saying it, but they don't really have one. Like, for example, they kept on talking about going for growth in the first 6 months. The big problem in the economy was a lack of growth. True. But everything they do is anti-growth. They are continuing to raise taxes, which we all know lowers economic growth. They're continuing to raise regulations across the economy, which is anti-growth. Even yesterday, they announced that they're going to regulate football. Literally, the one thing in this country you do not need to regulate. The one thing which is actually going very, very well, which we do better than anywhere else in the world, is we've got a better football league. And that is the one thing where the government goes, oh, yeah, you know what? I'm going to get involved in that as well and trying to hamstring that growth. And so everything they say is contrary to actually the measures they have in place. And the reason that is in the DNA of the Labor Party. They don't know how to grow an economy because none of them are instinctively business people or instinctively even economics types of people. They're all, ex-union or ex-political staffers. None of them have any experience in how you grow something and build something. And so it's no surprise that when they actually get into government and they're faced with a growth challenge, their instinct is just tax more, spend more,
Hmm.
and then regulate more. And the outcome is we're going to see just more stagnant economic figures for the next 4 years. And I fear by that stage, this country is going to be in a devastatingly bad shape.
So now, when we compare the Labour Party, that has no businessmen, to the barely any businessmen, if we compare it to the Reform Party, that is full of businessmen, full of people oriented on business, and they're very ambitious on cutting taxes. Do you think um, understand the working class better than the Labour Party does.
So make no mistake, I've got my issues with reform as well. I uh, I am concerned that they may not be willing to address the structural economic challenges that we face. Uh, I've been very concerned about how the internal running of the party so far. I've got concerns around how Nigel Farage manages his people. I think the Rupert Lowe scandal was particularly good, but at the same time, sad
Hmm.
example of how he may not, at the moment, be in a position to manage an effective cabinet government. Uh, at the same time, I still think they are the best option if an election was held tomorrow. They've at least shown more willingness to say that this mass migration issue is a massive problem, and we're going to be stronger on it. They've at least said that we need to roll back net zero, which is a handbrake on growth. We need to start investing more, or we need to start taking advantage of our natural resources more. So I wouldn't go as far as saying that reform is a magic bullet. I don't think it is yet. But politics isn't about miracles, right? It's about what are the best
Hmm.
options available to you. I think that and I've flip flopped a bit in the last couple of months because I think if the Conservatives were to embrace someone like Robert Jenrick, and if they were to atone for their sins and really be the party of fiscal responsibility, then that would be a really interesting contrast to reform, which I don't think is as interested in cutting down spending from what I can see so far as what potentially the Conservatives would be. Um, but talk is cheap, and they had 14 years and they didn't do it. And so that is a long way of saying I think there are problems everywhere. This Labor Party has to go, but we've got 4 years. At the moment, I would take reform. But until the next election, I think everyone should be judging each issue on its merits, as opposed to saying reform is my team or the Conservatives are my team, and I just need to support them no matter what. I think that's a really big problem in modern politics, and we've got to avoid that temptation.
You have mentioned the net zero policies, and to me, the first question that comes to my mind when we discuss net zero is many people say it is sustainable for the country to transition. And to me, the question arises how economically sustainable will be the change, because we will need to spend, the country will need to spend a lot of money to really facilitate that.
It's not sustainable. It's not viable is the answer.
Hmm.
And there's a very obvious little hint in net zero, which is goes to why that this is such a flawed policy, and that is if green technologies were such a great option economically, then you wouldn't have to force people to do it. You wouldn't have to force businesses to do it. Net zero is a ban on fossil fuels. That is what it is effectively. And if that was the approach economically, then you wouldn't have to force businesses to do it. But they are. And the reason they're forcing them to do it is because the energy that is provided by fossil fuels is still cheaper, it's still more reliable, it's still more versatile, and it's still more scalable than any of the renewables options that we currently have at our disposal. And so it's just going to cost a huge amount of money. And it's going to cost a huge amount of money for absolutely no environmental benefit. The United Kingdom, much like Australia, contributes 3/5 of bugger all to global climate emissions. Any change, any net zero change, even if it's successful, will not make a jot of difference to the global climate. So, what you're doing, by definition, is symbolic. Now, symbolism, when things are going well, you may be able to invest in. But when things are so dire as they are at the moment in the UK economy, we cannot afford this sort of mindless symbolism. And I've only heard two arguments as to why we should still pursue this, even though it won't change the climate in any way. Number one is we need to be a global leader and other
Yeah,
countries will
that's
follow.
what I hear often. Yeah.
And it's bullshit. Like, if you honestly think that Russia or China or the United States care about what the UK's energy policy is, you have rocks in your head. China is still building somewhere between 2 to 3 new coal-fired power stations every week. Do you think they really care what Ed Miliband thinks about environmental policy? Of course they don't. So that argument is silly. It's always been silly. The second argument is, well, we need to create this new green energy sector in our economy, and ultimately that will be better than having cheap energy in the form of fossil fuels. And again, that is also a nonsense. And it's a nonsense because if that was the case, the market would have determined that, and it wouldn't be up to government to determine that. But that hasn't happened.
Hmm. No, yeah, I agree with that take a lot actually. And one of the other things that is, I can say, blossoming under Keir Starmer is gender dysphoria and trans ideology, which is almost everywhere now. We have had an LGBT parade, if I'm not mistaken, where army officers were marching. What
Mm.
do you think of that?
So a couple of I saw you spoke to Connie Shaw a couple of days ago. She's been
Hmm.
very, very good on this issue. A couple of
This
things.
is
Number
this
one,
is
I would
indeed your topic, yes, but I'm interested in your opinion as well.
yeah. I actually think on the trans issue there has been really pleasing developments in the United Kingdom. I thought the Supreme Court ruling was very important, saying that under the law now, sex is a biological reality. That, for example, hasn't happened in Australia yet. I think that's a good thing. I think it's a good thing that the Cass review came out. What was it last year now? And it basically it pulled the hood up and revealed just how dangerous this ideology has been for children. In some respects, the UK is actually ahead of many other countries, including Australia and Europe, on the trans issue. And I would separate the trans issue from LGB, the kind of the gay rights side of things. In fact, a lot of gay people say that we don't want to have anything to do with the trans issue. In fact, if you look at the trans movement, there's arguably been no movement which has been more harmful to young gay boys in particular than gender ideology. Because disproportionately, gay or uh, trans surgeries and puberty blockers and all that sort of stuff have gone towards young gay men and disproportionately autistic young gay men. So I know many friends who are gay who say, don't lump the T in with the LGB. On the identity politics stuff more generally around gay rights, the host of the GB News show that I'm on every week, the Saturday Five, Alex Armstrong, he's very strong on this. He basically says what I think is very reasonable, and that is, I don't like the pride stuff. I don't like having my identity defined by my sexuality, and I think increasingly many, if not most, gay people feel that way. There is legal equality for gay people today. I don't think most people care if you're gay in society today, unlike 30 or 40 years ago. I think people just want to leave people to live their lives. So I actually, to round that out, I think there has been progress on the trans stuff in the UK. I think most people don't care if you're gay or not in the UK, but I think people still are just tired of having still the identity politics side of it shoved down your throat with the flags and the marches and all of the virtue signaling stuff because people feel like I'm just being lectured to and being told I'm a bad person when I'm not.
However, especially with the trans movement, trans ideology, it's very important, in my opinion, the role that NHS plays in this. Where do you think it stands now, and which role do all of the people working there play, like GPs and all of them?
Yeah, so this is why I think the problem won't just magically go away with that Supreme Court ruling because so many of our institutions, including the NHS, are still captured by this ideology. And so you're still seeing some pushback both in schools and in the NHS and in the media to say, well, I'm basically going to disregard this Supreme Court decision. Uh, and so I think that the battle is not over yet. Um, uh, and there is still that ideological capture amongst many doctors, nurses, and administrators in the NHS. So I think you're right to highlight it as an issue. I think the answer is you've just got to keep taking this fight to people and saying that sex is a biological reality and that the harm that is done to young people as a result of this ideology is incredibly dangerous.
When I was researching before this episode, one of the things I found in the uh, as, as an interesting discussion is the statistics saying that white British kids are becoming the minority in the UK.
Mm.
Do you
Mm.
think this is acceptable, or this is a dangerous thing?
I think it is a problem. Now, again, I think this is something where if you said that was a problem 2 years ago, there would have just been this reflexive response of, oh, well, you must be a racist.
Hmm. And there is an
But
improvement in this regard, right? People are
yeah,
not
I
racist
think
for that anymore. Almost.
people
Almost nobody.
people have had enough. There's a couple of points that need to be made on this. Number one, ethnicity is correlated with culture. So, if does being white innately give you some particular characteristics? Does being black innately give you some characteristics? No, it doesn't. But it does mean that you will be aligned with a particular cultural group. Now, I think people have seen this and gone, well, if, for example, you have a reduction in the kind of Anglo-Saxon white community in the United Kingdom and an increase in foreign migrants from countries which aren't culturally compatible, of course that's going to change the fabric of the United Kingdom. That is indisputable. You can't argue with that. So that is a problem. I think second, I think there are a lot of white Anglo-Saxon English men and women who say, well, hang on, why is it that, say, Caribbean English men and women, or go more broadly, African Americans, or the Chinese, or take your pick of any ethnicity other than white people, why do they are they allowed to like make to make their ethnicity such a central part of their identity? Why is that something that they're told to promote, to be proud of, but English ethnicity is is something to be ashamed of, or not even considered to be a thing? I've always found that contradiction to be very unusual. Like the answer is obvious. It's because that these people don't really think about it logically. They just say that the white people have historically been the oppressors, and now it's time to change the balance. So if I look at personally, I guess I'm white, Anglo-Saxon. I think kind of one side is Scottish, the other side's got a bit of German. They would have come from Europe to Australia in the late 1800s. Do I particularly care that I'm white? No, not really. But at the same time, I do find it very odd that there are other cultures which are told to promote your ethnic identity, and yet for me or for an Anglo-Saxon Englishman, you're told to basically forget about it. So I find that confusing.
Hmm. So, and this is one of the things I think you find good about reformists. We've never seen them in government. We don't know what would happen if they were in government, but at least now they're saying that the British culture and British values are going to be promoted under them. And don't you think that is happening under Labour? Because, I mean, Keir Starmer is also white, but he seems to have this um, interesting and weird, to me, um, which is why he was accused of two-tier justice system, etc. Uh, he has this almost like preference towards minority. Is that just a political narrative that he's required to follow, or is that a deliberate attempt to change society from him?
No, it's very deliberate because multiculturalism is the guiding ideology of the modern left. If you look at left wing parties, they used to be about equality from an economic perspective. And then you've seen this gradual change where they've gone from being about equality as under an economic lens to now basically being about identity politics and trying to get equity from a ethnic, religious, and cultural perspective. Uh, and so if there is anything that binds together the Labor Party today in the United Kingdom, it is the religion of multiculturalism. Now, I personally think multiculturalism is a failed ideology. I think it has been hugely damaging to every country in which it has been tried. I don't think multi ethnicity is necessarily a problem, but there is no doubt now that the United Kingdom is becoming a series of multicultural, multi ethnic ghettos where there isn't integration, where you have different cultural values in different areas, and that leads to cultural tensions, and that leads to crime, and that leads to a fraying of the social fabric. And that is why we are closer to civil unrest and potentially even civil war than this country has been in hundreds of years. And I think that Reform is the only party really that is fully awake to that problem. And I think Labor still have got their head in the sand over it.
Well, let's end this podcast on a very, I would say, humorous note, because it is humorous for me that 16-year-olds are going to be given the vote now. What do you think of that?
Yeah, it's a joke. But yeah, no, I don't think 16-year-olds should have the vote. I think if you're 16 years old, you should be focused on your schooling. And to be honest, if I think about myself at 16, I was not in a place to be able to make a considered, rational decision about policies and parties, and I don't think many other 16-year-olds are. But I think the other thing which you need to keep in mind about this is it was so cynical from this Labor
Hmm.
government. It was gerrymandering. They basically have said, well, we know that young people generally vote for left wing parties. So this is a way potentially for us to get a few extra million votes or whatever it may be. But I think it will backfire on them. I think you will get most of, if not all, of the vote that you would have expected to go to Labor from that 16 to 17-year-old cohort will go to whatever this new Jeremy Corbyn party will end up being. And it sounds like they
Yeah.
will proceed on. So they will chew up that. And then the increasingly sizable minority that is going to Reform, that will hold. So Reform could take 20% of the 16 to 17-year-old vote. You'll have the Corbyn one take, I don't know, 30 odd percent. And I think Labor will end up being behind in that calculation. Don't forget that Nigel Farage has more followers on TikTok than every other UK politician combined. So he obviously has a way of communicating with young people which is resonating with many of them. So I think this is yet another very dodgy policy from the Labor Party, but because they're so incompetent, it will probably end up backfiring.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for the discussion. Thank you so much for your time. And I had a lot of fun listening to your opinions.
Pleasure. Thank you, mate. Appreciate the invite.